Hello and welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to do some hands-on and look at the get API logs route in our sample code, identify the security misconfiguration in this route, and then see its impact and fix it. So let's go to our Visual Studio. Now in my code's entry file index.js, we have three required modules that we have imported, which are under our startup folder, which means that when our Express is starting up our app, we are loading these modules, right? So we already have looked into the routes modules, different routes that we are loading for different API endpoints. Now started.db loads our MongoDB. It just makes a connection to MongoDB for further using this DB connection in our APIs. And then we have the startup logging module that we are exporting in our logging.js file. Now in Express, it's very standard to use Winston package. This package allows you to enable different types of logging easily for different routes, for different purposes in your Express APIs. Now here we have one log file .log that we have configured to log all application logs, right? So we can just simply add winston.add the type of the transport. In this case, this is file type and the file name, right? This will be stored in our root folder here. You can see in the left menu. Now we are logging all uncaught exception for our process. So once our Express API is up, it will run as a process. It will run as a process on the server, and then all the uncaught exceptions and unhandled rejections are getting logged in this log file. So you can also go ahead and look at the log file. We have error type logs, and it also logs the info level logs. So if you look at index.js, we are also using Winston here to just log information logs. If you search for it in our application, so while sending email also we are using it, right? Connecting to DB, right? So this package is being used everywhere in our application to log different application events. Now if you go to our index file and routes, and then look at API logs route here, right? Let's go to this log.js file under route folder. Now here you can see that there's a route created for logs, and what we are doing here is returning the log file content. We're just setting the headers for a binary type file, setting the file name, and then pretty much sending back the content of the log file, right? Now if you notice here, there is a security misconfiguration, right? There is no authentication present for this route. Now this may have been created for development purposes, for developers to easily access routes which are created on the server through an endpoint, or it may be on purpose, but there is a security misconfiguration. Either when we deploy it to production, this should be disabled completely, and we should be exporting logs via log forwarder installed on the server itself to tools like Splunk, right, App Dynamics, etc. But here this is still exposed without any authentication, this route, which is a security misconfiguration and should be fixed. So what you can do here is either completely disable this route. So what we can do here is completely remove this route when we are deploying our application to production. So now here we can put a condition like if environment is dev, right, only then create this route or add this route to our application, express application, otherwise don't. And if in case the log route is required by your application in production, then we need to add the authentication module here with which does proper authentication for users accessing it by validating their token. And also maybe we need to add more middlewares here to check for different authorization like we did earlier. For example, we were checking for admin role in our previous vulnerability fix, but we also need to import those modules from our middleware folder. The auth one, and then also we want the admin check, for example, from our admin middleware, right? So this will enable authentication and authorization for our API/logs route, right? So this should fix our security misconfiguration. But just to see it in action, let's say I remove these two and go to my UI. So I can go back to my browser here and let's write API logs. So here I'm accessing our API directly, and here you can see that my logs file are getting downloaded, right, without any authentication. Let's cancel this, and if I go back to my code and add the authentication and authorization, let's just do authentication for now, right? And now if I try the API/logs route once again, let me open my network console. This time we got JWT token is not provided, 401 error, because we are not passing any token. So of course we got this error. So this is how we have fixed our security misconfiguration in our API, right? Now this one may look very close to broken authentication vulnerability, but there is a subtle difference between these two, because this one kind of come under the security misconfiguration, like how, because routes like /logs are not serving any functionality from the application perspective, any feature of the application, and this is just one of the configuration that's probably be used by the developers or the DevOps team to look at different logs or how the application is performing. So this is more about configuring the application and less about the application itself, the business flows, and that's why it's coming under security misconfiguration. Now similar to this one, there could be other issues as we discussed earlier related to how we are setting these headers wrong while responding back requests in our APIs, or it could be how we are storing this file. So wherever we store this log file, it has to be secured and the file permission should be granted properly. So this was one of the example of security misconfiguration in our application. Now to mitigate security misconfiguration, you can always follow some best practices like implement security hardening to your operating system or your VM wherever you're hosting your application. Keep all the systems and softwares on the system up to date so that all the latest vulnerability patches released by all these software owners are up to date in your application. Always disable all the features that are not required by your application just to reduce the scope of vectors that attackers can exploit. Always implement secure communication, always have SSL implemented or TLS, transport layer security, implemented whenever you're doing communication between two ports, whether inside your application or from your application clients from outside your network to your application. Always maintain SSL communication. As we have discussed earlier in previous vulnerabilities, always have proper access control to your application, whether at API level or at the VM or host level or the API level. Always implement codes, policies and security headers for your APIs, validate and sanitize input. So some of these we have already discussed in other vulnerabilities. And always implement proper error handling. One of the possible security misconfiguration could be when you are logging your error, you might be logging some confidential information along with your error message logging, and you might be sending back that error to your front end, right, to your users, and that error might expose some sensitive information. So always make sure that whenever you are logging and sending back messages to user, they don't contain any sensitive information. So this was all about security misconfiguration in APIs. That's all for this lecture, and I will see you in the next one with a new vulnerability. Thanks.